They left, and all I heard was pride, not love. The sound of the door closing was sharper than I expected. It wasn't just wood and brass meeting. It was the sound of an ending. I stood there, frozen, listening to the echo travel down the hall, 1, 2, 3 seconds, before the silence swallowed it whole. That silence has a texture now. It hangs in the air like dust in a sunbeam, visible only when light dares to touch it. I wish I could tell you it was sudden. But truth rarely is. It builds, layer after layer, until the heart cracks under the weight of what's been unsaid. For years, my family and I lived inside that quiet tension. Smiles that trembled, dinners that ended too early, prayers that felt more like rehearsed apologies. And then tonight, the last thread snapped. Daniel's voice was steady, deliberate. He has his father's posture, shoulders squared, jaw set as though mercy were a form of weakness. "You chose faith over us, Mother," he said. The words didn't shout, they accused. Behind him, Claire's eyes pleaded for peace, though her silence betrayed exhaustion. She's always been the one who tries to hold the family together, patching cracks with gentle words, refusing to see that some walls are already crumbling. Emma stood by the window, clutching her cross, her tears falling as if they'd been waiting too long to escape. And I simply stood still. When the door closed, I didn't run after them. Not because I didn't care, but because I've learned something about love. Sometimes the most painful proof of love is not chasing what refuses to stay. The house grew still. The grandfather clock hesitated, as if it too feared making noise. Rain began to tap against the window, not a drizzle, but a restless rhythm, like fingers drumming on a table during a confession. I poured myself a cup of tea, though the warmth couldn't reach my hands. I sat in Robert's old armchair, his imprint still faint in the cushion, and for a fleeting second I could almost see him there, reading the paper, clearing his throat, glancing up at me with that familiar half-smile that said, "Patience, Margaret. Everything heals in time." But time, I've learned, doesn't heal everything. It only teaches you which wounds deserve to stay open. The walls around me seemed to breathe. Every creak of the floorboard, every flicker of candlelight felt like the house itself was mourning. I looked at the photo on the mantel, Robert's arm around my shoulders, the children laughing, all of us unaware that love, left unguarded, can quietly become pride. The fire had gone out hours ago, but I still felt the heat of the argument lingering in the room. Words like embers, glowing, dangerous, refusing to die. Daniel's voice kept returning in echoes. "You let him die without forgiveness. You let pride bury him." If only he knew. The truth is, I never stopped forgiving. I just stopped explaining myself. Because explanations are wasted on those who've already chosen their story. I walked through the dining room where the argument began. The table was still set for 5, though no one had touched the bread. Claire had tried to mediate, as always, her tone soft but trembling. "Mother," she'd said, "maybe you could just tell them you regret not being gentler." But gentleness isn't always kindness. Sometimes it's cowardice in disguise. Robert had made choices, private ones, that left me holding the moral weight of both of us. And when he died, that burden didn't vanish. It shifted. Now it's Daniel who carries it without knowing, shaping judgment out of love because he can't bear to imagine his father flawed. How could I tell them? How could I say that the man they worship in memory once nearly destroyed us in life? No, that truth is a storm I've kept locked away for years. It was my promise to Robert on his deathbed, that the children would remember him as good, even if it cost me their love. That is the truth they don't know, the truth I've carried like a stone under my ribs. Outside, thunder rolled, a deep, aching sound that seemed to agree with me. I went to the window and pressed my palm to the cold glass. The reflection stared back, a woman grayed by loss, not age. There is something cruel about seeing your face after heartbreak. It's the same face, but the eyes tell on you. They hold the map of what you tried to survive. Clara entered quietly, her steps measured, as if afraid to disturb what couldn't be fixed. "Would you like me to stay tonight, ma'am?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, Clara, let the house speak." She nodded. "Then I'll leave a candle in the hallway, just in case the dark tries to talk louder than it should." After she left, I wandered room to room, not to clean, not to remember, but to feel. The piano in the parlor still held Claire's last unfinished song. Dust lay on the keys like frost. I pressed one, and the note rang, thin, lonely, a ghost refusing to fade. In the kitchen, the scent of baked bread lingered, the last kindness before the storm. Emma had made it that morning, smiling shyly as she said, "Maybe we can eat together tonight. Hope always sounds so small before it breaks." I stopped by the door where Daniel's height was marked in pencil, each year a quiet record of his growth. The last mark was taller than Robert ever was. Pride runs deep in bloodlines. As I traced my fingers over those lines, I felt an ache that words can't name. Motherhood doesn't end when children walk away. It simply becomes prayer, a long, aching conversation with God, asking Him to keep them safe even when they believe they don't need you anymore. I walked to the fireplace and opened Robert's old box of letters. Most were faded, dated decades ago. But one, sealed in brown parchment, still waited. His final letter. The one no one knows about. The one that could end this distance in an instant, or destroy everything we built. I held it in my hands, but didn't open it. Some truths aren't ready to be spoken. They breathe better in silence, waiting for the right season. The rain softened, becoming a whisper. The kind that sounds like forgiveness approaching from far away. I sat again in Robert's chair, feeling smaller than I remembered, and for the first time I spoke aloud to the empty room. "I didn't choose pride," I said. "I chose peace. And sometimes, peace demands the highest price." The words trembled, but didn't break. It felt as if the walls themselves listened, holding their breath. Somewhere, a floorboard sighed, not from age, but from memory. Outside, the storm faded. The air carried the scent of wet earth and lilacs. Morning would come soon. And when it did, this house, though still empty, would not feel as heavy. Because tonight, in the silence, I remembered something I had forgotten. I am not the sum of who left me. I am the keeper of what stayed, faith, dignity, truth. And that truth, though unspoken, is what keeps the soul whole. It began like any other Sunday, the kind that carries the illusion of peace. The table was set before sunset, silver polished, candles waiting to be lit. Emma had arranged the lilies, white and pure, as if she could summon forgiveness through scent alone. I remember thinking how quiet the house felt, as though it already knew what was coming. I had baked Robert's favorite bread. Old habits die slower than love. The air was warm with cinnamon and yeast, a sweetness that didn't reach anyone's heart. Daniel arrived first. His knock wasn't a greeting, it was a declaration. He entered with Nora by his side, she poised as ever, her smile soft, but her eyes sharp. Claire came soon after, carrying the same look she wore whenever she expected to mediate a storm. Emma followed last, still in her church dress, her Bible clutched like a fragile defense. We all sat. For a moment, it almost looked like family again. Then Daniel spoke. "Mother," he began, the word too formal for blood. "We've come because we can't keep pretending. There are things that need to be said." The clock ticked. The candles flickered. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. He continued, "Father deserved peace before he died. You let him go without reconciliation. That's not strength, Mother. That's pride." The words landed heavy, deliberate. I saw the others glance down, as if afraid of what would come next. Claire's hand trembled slightly. She reached for her glass of water but didn't drink. Emma's lips moved in silent prayer. I wanted to tell him everything, to say that his father had begged me to hide the truth, that I'd carried Robert's sins like they were my own. But when I looked at Daniel, I saw a boy still trying to keep his father perfect. To strip him of that illusion would have been another kind of cruelty. So I said nothing. Silence, I've learned, is the loudest way to love someone who's not ready for the truth. Nora leaned forward. You can't live your whole life behind that faith of yours, Margaret. It's not sainthood. It's denial. There it was. The knife, disguised as reason. For a second, the room blurred. The faces of my children became echoes of their younger selves. Daniel at 12, scolding Emma for crying too much. Claire at 16, asking me what forgiveness really meant. They were still there, hidden beneath years and pride. I took a breath, steady but deep. I didn't deny anything, I said quietly. I simply chose to protect what could still be loved. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. Protect? From what, Mother? From truth? He didn't understand that truth isn't always medicine. Sometimes it's poison when given too soon. The air thickened. Even the clock seemed to hold its breath. Clara, standing by the doorway, froze in place. Her eyes, kind and knowing, met mine. And I knew she understood. She had seen the nights I cried in Robert's old chair. She knew the letter that still lay unopened in his box. But this wasn't her burden to carry. When the first tear fell, it wasn't mine. It was Claire's. Can't we stop? She whispered. This isn't what Father would have wanted. I smiled sadly. No, my love. This is exactly what he feared. Daniel rose to his feet. You always talk in riddles, Mother. Always hiding behind poetry and prayers. Maybe that's why none of us really knew you. I looked up at him, seeing not the man he'd become, but the boy he once was, standing by the pond, holding my hand, asking if God still loved him after he lied about breaking a window. Yes, Daniel, I said softly. He did, and he still does. He stared at me for a long moment, his anger collapsing into something like sorrow. But pride is quick to rebuild what regret tries to tear down. He turned away, jaw tight. That was when Nora stood. You've hurt him enough, she said. Faith doesn't excuse cruelty. Faith doesn't excuse it. It survives it. But I didn't say that. The sound of the chair scraping against the floor was louder than thunder. One by one, they followed Daniel out. No slamming doors, just quiet departures, which always hurt more. When they were gone, the house exhaled. It was a long, broken sigh that seemed to echo through the walls. I sat there, staring at the table. 4 untouched plates, the bread untouched, the wine gone bitter. The lilies had begun to droop. Even beauty knows when it's no longer welcome. The next morning, word spread through town faster than truth ever could. Whispers in the bakery, side glances at church, the sort of pity that wears perfume but stinks of judgment. Did you hear? The Hale widow refused to forgive her husband before he died. Poor children. Imagine living with a mother that cold. Every smile I met carried an unspoken sermon. I started attending service later in the evenings, when the pews were nearly empty. Reverend Whitmore would nod politely, his eyes full of things he wished to ask but never dared. I appreciated that restraint. Some wounds don't need tending, only space. Clara became my shadow. She spoke less, moved quieter. Sometimes she'd hum hymns while sweeping, her voice gentle as mercy. At night she'd leave tea outside my room without knocking. I never told her how much that silence meant. The garden grew wild that season. The roses bloomed too fast, as if desperate to prove something. I didn't prune them. I let them tangle and twist. It felt honest. Beauty, after all, doesn't always grow in order. Weeks passed. The house adjusted to its new rhythm, the sound of solitude, the echo of steps that belonged only to me. I learned the language of quiet things, the whisper of curtains, the breath of the fire, the sigh of old wood remembering laughter. But loneliness, when fed by pride and misunderstanding, becomes something else, a mirror that shows you what the world refuses to see. One evening, as I sat reading by the dim light of the lamp, I found myself tracing Robert's handwriting on one of his letters. It was steady, confident, almost arrogant, the kind of hand that never expected to be questioned. I wondered if he ever imagined this would be his legacy, a family divided by his silence, a wife crucified by his secrets. I closed my eyes. The rain began again, gentle this time, tapping like fingers on the glass. I whispered a prayer, not for reconciliation, but for strength. Because peace doesn't come when others finally understand you. It comes when you stop needing them to. I thought of Daniel, of his fury masking grief, of Claire, carrying everyone's pain like it was her job, of Emma, too tender for a world that punishes gentleness. I loved them all, fiercely, endlessly, even from a distance. And as the storm outside softened to mist, I made a promise in that half-light. I would wait. Not for their apology, not for their understanding, but for the right moment to tell the truth. Because love, when it's real, always finds its way back to light. Morning arrived like a confession. Soft, hesitant, wrapped in pale light that refused to touch certain corners of the house. I hadn't slept. There are nights when the soul stays awake long after the body gives up, wandering through memories like hallways without doors. I poured tea and watched the steam rise, curling into the air like a spirit unsure if it wanted to stay or leave. The clock ticked with a merciless calm. It had been a month since that dinner, since the day love turned its face away. The house had learned to live with its silence. Even the wind passed gently now, respectful of my grief. That morning, Clara entered quietly. She placed a small parcel on the table, brown paper tied with faded twine. "It was in the old drawer by the study," she said. "You might want to see it." I stared at the parcel for a long time before touching it. My name was written on it in Robert's hand, that firm, deliberate script I knew better than my own heartbeat. For years I had avoided opening the last box of his things, not out of pain, but reverence, as though keeping them sealed kept him near. But there it was, waiting. Inside was an envelope, aged, fragile at the edges, sealed with a trace of wax long turned brittle. My hands trembled. I remembered the night he wrote it. I had come into the room quietly, and he'd covered the page as though it were a secret. He smiled and said, "Not yet, Maggie. You'll read this when I'm ready." He died 2 days later. For years I thought he meant it for the children. I thought it was a letter of blessing or advice. But now, holding it, I felt the truth press against me. This wasn't meant for them. It was meant for me. I broke the seal. The paper unfolded with a sigh, like it had been waiting to breathe again. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, I've already failed to say in life what I should have said in time. There are things I kept from you, not because you couldn't bear them, but because I couldn't bear seeing the reflection of my faults in your eyes. I was proud, too proud. And that pride hurt you more than any sin I committed. I spoke of faith, but I lived by fear. I built walls where love asked for doors. You were right to stand where you did, even when it made you alone. You carried the weight I should have carried. If the children ever turn from you, let them. Time will show them the truth. But promise me one thing. Don't defend me. Let silence guard what shame once hid. When pride breaks, let it break on its own. Forgive me, my love. You already have, I know. But I need to say it for myself. You were the better part of me, the quiet strength I never deserved. You're Robert. I read it twice. Then again. Each word lifted a stone from my chest, only to place another in my heart. It wasn't the apology that broke me. It was the confirmation that all this time I had carried guilt that never belonged to me. that the silence which divided us was born not from coldness, but from mercy. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears falling not in sorrow, but in release. For the first time in years, I prayed without asking, just gratitude, raw and trembling. Clara found me there hours later, sitting by the window with the letter open on my lap. "You've found peace," she whispered. "Not yet," I said. "But I've found truth, and truth asks to be spoken." That evening, the sky turned the color of forgiveness, a soft blend of lavender and gold. The church bells rang in the distance, calling for the midweek service. I hadn't attended in weeks. That night, I felt drawn. The chapel was half empty. Reverend Whitmore greeted me with his gentle nod. "It's good to see you back, Mrs. Hale." "It's time," I said simply. When the hymns ended and the congregation prepared to leave, I stood. My hands trembled, but my voice did not. "I have something to say." All eyes turned. Daniel was there. I hadn't known he would come. Nora sat beside him, her expression unreadable. Claire looked startled. Emma clutched her hands together, whispering my name like a prayer. I took a deep breath. "For weeks," I began, "you've believed I chose pride over love, that I refused to forgive your father. But the truth is simpler and heavier. I forgave him before he asked. I only stayed silent because he asked me to." A murmur ran through the pews. Daniel frowned. "What are you talking about?" I unfolded the letter. "Your father left this for me. He wanted me to protect you from his mistakes, but the time for silence has passed." My voice steadied. The candlelight flickered, warm and trembling like a heartbeat. I read Robert's words aloud. As the letter filled the church, something shifted. A weight, long invisible, lifted from the air. People listened not out of curiosity, but reverence. Even the walls seemed to lean closer. When I finished, no one spoke. Only the sound of quiet weeping broke the stillness. Daniel stood slowly. His eyes, usually hard, were wet with disbelief. He wrote that?" "Yes," I said. "And I carried it all these years, not to punish you, but to protect the love you had for him." He stepped forward. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" "Because love isn't proven by explanations," I answered. "It's proven by endurance." For a moment, he said nothing. Then he knelt, not in weakness, but in recognition. "Forgive me, Mother." Those words, so simple yet so long awaited, fell like rain on dry ground. Claire began to cry openly. Emma whispered, "Thank you, Lord." Even Nora bowed her head, her hand over her heart. I reached out, touched Daniel's face, the same face that had once frowned at his father's grave. "You were always your father's son," I said softly. "But now you are also your own man." The Reverend approached slowly. "Sometimes," he said, "truth arrives when pride finally leaves the room." And in that little chapel, surrounded by echoes and grace, I felt it, the quiet miracle of restoration. Not loud, not grand, just honest. When the service ended, people lingered. Some touched my hand in silence, others simply nodded. The world, it seemed, had turned a little softer. Outside, the air smelled of rain and redemption. Daniel walked beside me. "I don't know how to make it right," he said. "You just did," I replied. We reached the gate. The moon was bright, the street still. He looked at me, uncertain. "Will you come home?" I smiled faintly. I never left. Later that night, I placed Robert's letter back in its box, not hidden this time, but resting openly on the mantel. A candle burned beside it, its flame steady and gold. The house, once cold and heavy, now hummed with quiet peace. I could almost hear Robert's laughter in the distance, faint but kind. I sat in his chair, closed my eyes, and let the silence speak again. Only now it was not empty. It was full of grace, of memory, of love reborn in truth. And for the first time in a long while, I whispered into the dark, "Pride divides, but peace restores." When I returned home that night, the air outside felt different. Not lighter, not colder, but cleansed. As if the rain had washed away the very sound of yesterday. The path to the house was glistening, each puddle catching the moon like a secret it was proud to keep. Clara was waiting at the door, She didn't speak, only smiled. That knowing, quiet smile of someone who has watched the soul break and mend in the same season. She held a shawl open for me, wrapping it gently around my shoulders, the gesture simple but sacred. "The house feels warmer tonight," she said softly. "It's not the house," I whispered. "It's what we've let back in." For months, this place had been a tomb, heavy with memory, haunted by words unsaid. Now, as I stepped through the threshold, it felt almost alive again. The walls no longer listened for arguments. They simply listened. I lit a single candle in the parlor, the same one that had burned low the night they left me. Its flame rose tall, steady, like forgiveness itself had found its form. The air smelled faintly of lavender and old books. I walked through each room, touching the backs of chairs, the corners of framed photographs, the piano that had waited patiently for Claire's hands. Everything was as it had been, and yet nothing was the same. This, I realized, is what peace sounds like. It doesn't arrive with thunder or applause. It enters quietly, sits beside you, and whispers, "You can rest now." Days passed, and the rhythm of life began to return, gentle, unhurried. Daniel came often. At first, his visits were cautious, his words careful, as if he were stepping across thin ice. But ice melts under love, even slow love. One morning, he brought a small plant, a fig sapling. "For the garden," he said. "Father always wanted one." I smiled. "Then we'll plant it together." As we dug the soil, I watched his hands, calloused, strong, unsure. There was something tender about seeing pride make room for humility. He paused, looking at me. "Mother, do you believe people can change?" "I don't just believe it," I said. "I've lived it." The wind carried the scent of earth and promise. When we finished, we stood silently, the sapling swaying slightly, as though bowing to both of us. Emma came later that week with Claire. They brought music, real music, back into the house. Claire's fingers trembled at first on the piano keys, hesitant, then grew sure again. Emma sang softly, her voice thin but pure, weaving faith into melody. Even Nora visited once, quiet and polite. I didn't expect words from her. Sometimes presence is the only apology we need. Clara, watching from the hallway, wiped her eyes with her apron. "It feels like the house is breathing again," she whispered. "Yes," I said, "but it's not the house that's alive. It's us." One evening, I sat by the window and reread Robert's letter. The edges were soft now, creased by tears and time. I thought about all the ways love disguises itself, sometimes as anger, sometimes as distance, sometimes as silence. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't a single act. It's a practice, a choice made again each morning when memory stirs. I looked at the portrait above the mantel, Robert in his youth, full of charm and certainty. For the first time, I didn't see the man who failed me. I saw the man who tried, the one who, in his final breath, had chosen truth over pride. And I forgave him again. Not because he asked, but because I still could. The seasons changed. The fig tree grew. Birds began nesting on its branches, singing at dawn, as though the garden itself had remembered joy. The house filled slowly with new sounds, laughter over tea, footsteps on the stairs, music drifting from the piano. But every evening, when the others left, I found myself alone again in the quiet. And for the first time, that solitude felt holy. I would sit in Robert's chair, light a candle, and let the silence settle. The flame would dance, steady and golden, and I'd whisper the same words I once wrote in sorrow. They left, and all I heard was pride, not love. Then I'd smile and add, but love was never gone. It was only waiting for us to return. That, I think, is how healing works. It doesn't erase the past, it redeems it. One Sunday, Daniel asked if I would join him at church again. "It's been too long since we sat together," he said. I hesitated, then nodded. When we entered the chapel, heads turned, not with judgment, but welcome. The Reverend smiled from the altar, eyes kind. During the service, when the choir sang, "It is well with my soul," I felt tears rise, uninvited but clean. Daniel reached for my hand, and for a brief moment it felt like holding Robert's again, not in body, but in spirit. The circle was complete. The silence had come full circle, from pain to peace, from exile to homecoming. That night, I wrote one last entry in my journal. Some loves break us to rebuild us. Some silences teach us to listen again. Pride may close the door, but grace will always find a way through the cracks. And when it does not knock. It enters gently, as light through a window that's been waiting all along. I closed the book and left it on the table, beside Robert's letter. The candle beside them flickered, its flame tall and calm. Outside, the world was quiet, the kind of quiet that holds peace, not absence. The moon poured its light through the window, painting the room in silver. I breathed deeply, feeling the fullness of life returning where grief once lived, because in the end, love is not lost. It only waits for the noise to stop, so it can speak again. And you? Would you have chosen pride or peace? Tell me, which voice would you have followed?